So today we're going to talk a little bit about underpainting. So here I have same image, underpainted, one in sepia and one in black. And I'm going to do glazing versions on the sepia one. I've already painted over the one in black for you to be able to kind of compare. So this is sort of like doing a grisaille. It's all very monotone. I've got my colors, and now we're going to use, so on the right there, that chunkier white paint, and on the left is glazing medium. So what I'm going over this with is fairly transparent layers. They're very thin. I don't have a lot of texture to them. So I'm starting by just applying a local color, kind of a warm golden orange that I will be able to both push lighter and warmer yellow and darker for my shadows. And then I'm starting to block in my shadows with a bit of Payne's gray mixed with a deep purple. All of these will be affected by the layers that go on top of them. Obviously, acrylics, even when you're glazing, are not as transparent as a watercolor would be. On the orange and on the flowers, I'm just getting in some base tones. They're a little brighter. And now going in with my brightest yellow and blocking in my highlights, my more vibrant areas, and allowing it to sort of show through in a couple shadows and the reflections on the glass. You can see how this sort of acts with the underpainting. The information's already there for you, and it's so much easier to block out these shapes using just two colors, so that then you can go through and worry about the tones and the hues, but the value is all decided for you. Your underpainting doesn't have to be perfect. In acrylics, of course, you're able to change things after the fact. But this one I just did a wash of that sepia tone, and then I picked up areas with a rag where I wanted highlights and put in a little bit more where I wanted it to be darker. It just gives you such a nice starting point. Now, one area I think you will notice a bigger difference than the black underpainting is in these reflections and atmospheric parts of the background that you see through the black. With the sepia wash, they're going to be more apparent than they were on the black and white grisaille on the other side, because we have a little more oomph as we apply the blacks over it. Now, one thing I really like about working with glazes like this is that anywhere that I apply a dark shadow, it's going to show through even if I make it a vibrant color. And if I put down whites for highlights, they're going to pick up color really, really well. So if I, put in a bright white highlight, even though it's not going to be bright white when I'm done, it's going to pick up that yellow much, much better. Versus the yellow will sort of fade into the background on other things. So it's kind of like creating a way for you to color inside the lines without having to control your brush strokes as much. If you accidentally pick up the wrong color on your brush, you can definitely wash it off. If we're allowing this to dry in between layers and then coming back and continuing with glazes. Do not just keep trying to wet blend them. They get very sticky, everything gets muddy. So after every couple passes here, I'm just setting it aside, letting it dry, blow drying it. It dries a lot faster because these layers are very, very thin. So here's where you're going to see how using some of this white paint, I've got it with the medium in it, so it's pretty thinned out. But it's lightening these areas. It's not very impressive now, but when we go over it with a color, those are going to really pick up. I'm also sort of, in order to give things dry time, I might bounce back and forth between the subject and the background. You can see how much medium I'm mixing into things on my palette there. It's mixing it until it's almost translucent. It's hard to see when you're working with white, which is about the only one that really looks odd. But even when you're applying it, the medium looks white until it dries and it's translucent, so it looks like it affects your colors. So just mix the color you know you're going to want, and then have faith that when you mix it with the medium and it changes color, it will go back. It'll be okay. So being very bold with these white highlights, they're kind of intense, but knowing that we're going to glaze them down so that they're more of a fit for where we're working. So we laid all the shadows first. Now we're vibrancing, adding more vibrance to our highlights here. So you can see just how nicely that picks up that yellow and it really pops off the page now. But it also softens the edges of the white because the glaze does affect the colors around it, so it's a way to sort of blend your brush strokes in also, while controlling how vibrant something is. So while those layers are drying, we're going to do a little work on the background here. I'm using a very saturated amount of paint where I want dark shadows and dark recesses, and then I'm going to keep adding more medium in these areas that I want the reflections that I've painted and the colors I painted to show through the black. And even use just clean medium on a clean brush to soften the edges and pull them out. So if you lay down a heavy layer of, say, this black paint, and then I want that to sort of feather out, a nice way to do that is to clean your brush and then apply some of the glazing or any clear medium to it and then pass over those edges, and it really softens them. So that I laid down a heavy amount of paint and then cleaned my brush, got clear medium on it, and then just used that to push the paint around to kind of add the glaze choppy brushstroke effect, because it's almost like a soft wall light or something. It's got a bit of texture in it. So using a really diluted black to soften and brush in these edges to bring the vignette in to add this texture. I let it dry and then came back and did that. So now I'm going to add some of those secondary midtones and blend my highlights in a little bit better and define my details. Details are something we often kind of start to lose with our acrylics. Wait till everything is dry, come back with a smaller brush or a fine tip on your flat brushes and use those to really define where things are. Up your contrast, so I'm using a deep purple mixed with a deep red here, like a Bordeaux color, to add some shadows. Glossing over anywhere that the pure white is now too bright in the balance. The hottest highlight should be on that corner of the jar over there. So we're going to use a brush that has a bit of a choppy edge, some glazing medium, but less than we've been using because I don't want it to be entirely translucent, and do a little vertical stroke to create those highlights that you see in glass. Touch up the highlights on the flower and keep adding more medium, and while this is wet to create that transition, I'm going to add a little bit of the yellows and oranges back into the flowers and the things that are around the jar as well. You can see that that shadow up there just sort of got away from me. It got taken up by too many of our white highlights, so we're using this opportunity to bump it back in and to do some warm shadows into the wetter paint that's on those flowers, because I know they'll mix when I'm going wet into wet, so I'll get a nice kind of pre-blended effect. There we go. So as you can see, we get a good result with both versions of underpainting. We get a little bit more warmth from a warmer background and a little bit of a cooler effect and a darker effect from the dark background, the black and white background. But both are incredibly effective at giving you a ground plan and your values in advance, which is the wonderful thing about underpainting, so that you can focus on your hues, your vibrancy, your values. All right, good luck.